Hello and a very warm welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching a brand new edition of World Panorama with me, Frank Pereira. Over the next half an hour, we'll bring you a roundup of all the significant events to have happened around the world this week. But first, a look at the headlines. Influx of African migrants into Europe takes on worrying dimensions as thousands of refugees struggle towards Western Europe through inhuman conditions. There's a sharp rise in boat capsize tragedies in the Mediterranean. Bodies of more than 70 migrants found in an abandoned lorry in Austria sends out shockwaves. Police say that they likely suffocated to death in the truck crate. Chinese stock markets crash spreads fear to global markets, raising fears of a fading China growth story. Chinese shares end the week almost 8% down, with shock losses through the week. An Islamic State raises ruins of a 2,000-year-old temple in Pereira, terming it un-Islamic. Chorus of protest from historians and scholars around the globe. UN terms the destruction a war crime. Our top story this week: the African refugee crisis in Europe threatens to boil over. Numbers of mostly illegal migrants pouring in by sea and land from Syria and Libya and beyond now runs into tens of thousands. Ugly accidents killing hundreds have become commonplace. Living conditions of these refugees worsen as the EU struggles to chalk out a policy to deal with the influx. Here's more.
There's no future. The war was difficult. Yeah, every day bomb and kill and steal, everything.
Shireen made it to Piraeus Island in Greece from her home in war-torn Syria after an arduous trek and dangerous sea voyage. Rescued by Greek authorities, she hopes to push on with nearly 250 other migrants in her group. Not just Greece and Italy, where 30,000 migrants entered Europe in July alone, even countries well away from the Mediterranean are fast turning into refugee hubs amid overflowing camps. Reports say the influx has tripled over just the last couple of weeks. Setting up of camps is unable to keep pace. They pitch tents in urban areas. Conditions digress to the inhuman.
We don't have a place, it's not life. We're going to play safe to my children, for us. My country is war. We can't, no hospital, no working, no money, not safe.
And we want to go to Germany from Serbia and Hungary and Austria and Germany.
The aim is to get to West Europe, to Germany or France or even the UK, get themselves legalized by hook or crook and begin life afresh. Many have spent months on the move, up against all possible odds of hunger, filth, overcrowding, boat capsize, arrest and torture, often even death. The migrants, mostly from Syria, Libya and Iraq and parts of North Africa fleeing ravage at home, take multiple routes. They come via land, via Turkey to Greece and westwards, via Serbia, Hungary and Austria into Germany. Or they cross the Mediterranean from North Africa into Italy and Spain and fan out from there. The sea route that most have to take some time in their journey has proved tragically hazardous. SOS calls from overcrowded dinghy boats are common. Turkish, Greek, Italian, even Swedish Navy boats have rescued hundreds from these waters. For many that are rescued, several aren't. Reports of tragedies of 50, 70, 100 migrants drowned at sea have gone up. Close to 200 were reported killed after a boat full of migrants capsized off Italy this last week. Pushing these migrants out to sea, promising them a safe haven, has turned into a dirty smuggling racket.
There's a business in smuggling because there are no legal ways for them to get there. This is what refugees and migrants are resorting to. They're resorting to having to risk their lives to cross the Mediterranean, and now they're resorting to having to risk their lives to reach Northern Europe.
Policymakers in Europe struggle to come to terms with it. Populations have exploded in Mediterranean coastal nations. Germany expects some 800,000 fresh refugees this year. That's 1% of its population. On the finance front, the European Commission is to make available €8 million for emergency assistance to Balkan nations and Turkey. Emergency funding has doubled to €50 million this year.
Our main task is to support the member states in these difficult circumstances. I understand that these are crucial days, the ones that come, and we obviously will continue to very closely coordinate our actions, our statements and our steps together with the Estonian authorities and in coordination with the family.
It is under the migrant crisis shadow that the Western Balkans Summit started in Vienna. The problem dominated its agenda. This refugee emergency is the worst Europe has seen since World War II, stirring social tensions and testing the resources and solidarity of the 28-nation European Union. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha Television.
Meanwhile, here's news of another massive tragedy around migrants to Europe, one that hit headlines and created massive tremors this last week. Austrian police found dead bodies of 71 people suspected to be illegal migrants in an abandoned lorry on a motorway on Thursday. The bodies are of 59 men, 8 women and 4 children. They are believed to have been dead for 1.5 to 2 days. Police say that the victims probably died after suffocating in the vehicle. 3 people thought to be Bulgarian have been detained in Hungary. They are believed to have driven the truck. Authorities say that the victims were probably already dead when the vehicle crossed into Austria from Hungary. Investigations are focused around the Hungarian number plates. Vigils and candlelight memorial services for the victims have been held around Europe. Well, joining me for a chat to talk about this is Pramit Chaudhari, Foreign Affairs Editor of the Hindustan Times. Welcome to the show, Pramit.
Thank you.
You know, this crisis is creating a lot of trouble for most of the European nations. Yeah. And, you know, it's not like the migrants are being led to the promised land, because there are several issues all along the way. And even once they reach these European countries, the trouble doesn't stop there for them.
Yeah. Well, let's put this in context. We're looking at about 250,000 migrants or refugees coming via these Balkan and Mediterranean routes every year to Europe. America annually gets 300,000 illegal migrants with virtually no real political issues there. So this is actually not a very large number of people. The problems are twofold. One is that Europe does not have a common immigrant policy. Each country has its own policy, and therefore there are a lot of internal disputes. So the Italians, for example, are complaining that the bulk of the migrants come to us. And meanwhile, the people up in the north are basically ignoring the issue. And until recently, the Italians have said that we're virtually on our own in handling this issue. The second problem is that there's a lot of anti-immigrant sentiment in Europe right now. So the mainstream political parties are very reluctant to endorse or do anything to help the migrants, except when there is a major humanitarian crisis, when people are dying, because almost all of these countries have large anti-migrant parties which are challenging the mainstream, whether in Britain, UKIP, Marine Le Pen's party in France, even in places like Finland and Switzerland, you're seeing anti-immigrant parties coming to power or taking large shares in parliament. So this has made the crisis much more politically difficult to handle, though the actual numbers are not necessarily all that unusual in terms of migrant movements.
But hundreds, maybe even thousands, continue to die on on a monthly basis, and we've seen it. It's extremely common for many of these migrants, to travel in overcrowded boats, overcrowded trucks, and to continue to die. So how does this situation really play out, and what needs to be done to control this kind of an exodus? Well,
your problem is, you look down, if you did the breakdown of the figures, yes, you're roughly about 3,000 to 4,000 migrants are probably dying every year, at least from the figures we're getting. Most of them are capsizing in the Mediterranean. A few, as you mentioned, are dying on trucks or on land. But the bulk of them are dying when they're on the ocean, is the most difficult part. And probably many more thousands are dying en route to the Mediterranean, which we don't even know about. If you break down the figures, the vast bulk of them, the single largest number, are coming from Syria. About 60,000, 70,000 out of that 250,000 are coming from Syria. And obviously, that's just the consequence of the civil war there. And until that civil war ends, these migrants will continue to stream out of Syria. Obviously, if it's in civil war, they'll be desperate to try to do anything to get out of that country. The second largest number are from Eritrea. And Eritrea is not in civil war. Eritrea is being ruled by an extremely despotic dictatorial regime whose sheer repression is driving Eritreans out. And so really the world should be looking at Eritrea and wondering, can there be something that can be done about this government, which is sometimes called the North Korea of Africa because it's extreme terror. The others, and then the numbers after that break down into smaller numbers into lots of little countries, Mali, and some of these sub-Saharan African countries, which are largely economic, but you're looking at smallish numbers, 10 or 15,000. Incorrectly often it's said that they're Libyans. Actually, there are very few Libyans. Libya is the conduit country for which these migrants are coming through because Libya is in chaos.
Yes.
So it's very difficult to get into Morocco or into Tunisia or even to Egypt because they have their own border guards and everything, their governments function. Libya, on the other hand, is complete chaos. So there's now a nice trafficking industry working in Libya where the local militia will help somebody from Mali or Eritrea, take some money from them, push them on, get them a boat, and then extract more money and move them on. So the chaos in Libya is part of the problem. The Libyans themselves are not the migrants.
You know, should this issue then be addressed differently? You know, it says a lot about, you know, the kind of places that these migrants are really traveling from into Europe. So should you know, all Europeans and the others get together and deal with the situation in maybe a Syria or some of these North African countries, and that automatically then brings down, you know, migrants going into Europe.
Then obviously you have a supply issue, side issue. Solution is where you address the problems back home. And that, I would agree, should be the actual way to do it. The problem is right now you have two issues. One is that Europe itself has no common foreign policy. They have no common foreign security policy. They're almost incapable of even deciding their own internal economic problems are consuming them. And their foreign policy responses now are extremely weak. So the Russian, for example, the Russian conquest of the Crimea and eastern Ukraine has barely got it's got a fragmented European response. Even the East European countries can't agree on how to respond to this. And that was a clear case for them of military intervention by a hostile power. This migrant population, as I said, Greece and Italy are taking the brunt, so the other countries are sort of running away from the problem altogether. So that's one. The second problem is that traditionally you would have seen the United States taking lead on a major global crisis, given that the Europeans are, in theory, their closest allies. But America is basically, under Obama, is very clear that this is not our issue.
Indeed.
And indeed that Syria is not our issue, Libya is not our issue, and Eritrea is not our issue anymore. That these are the type of international issues that America prefers not to deal with whatsoever. So
at the moment, of course, the situation looks extremely tricky. It remains to be seen what happens in the near future. Thank you so much, Pramit, for joining us on the program and putting things into perspective for us. Well, on that note, of course, we'll slip into a short break now, but it's peace for now between North and South Korea after weeks of fears of military conflict restarting. Both sides have signed a peace agreement. We'll have more on that and other international news on the other side. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching Rajya Sabha Television. It was bloodbath at the Chinese stock market early this week. Shares nosedived 8.5% on August 24th, termed Black Monday, and dropped a further 7.6% the next day. It's the worst fall in nearly 8 years, shattering investor confidence and setting off tremors that hit markets in the US and Europe. Closer analysis shows this was a disaster waiting to happen, one that Chinese government intervention will find difficult to control as it plays havoc with the retail investor. Here's more.
It was the stock market bear hug nightmare come to life. The Black Monday market's tailspin exacerbated fears that had long been rife. The culmination of a 3-month-long rout as Chinese equities threatened to get out of hand. China's inflated economic and stock market bubble burst in June this year after doubling over the previous 12 months. A surprise devaluation of the yuan earlier this month confirmed a sharp dip in China's industrial activity. But the government had no bold new market interventions. $3.25 trillion have been wiped out since June. Given that more than 85% of investors in Chinese markets are retail investors, this group is the worst hit.
我觉得应该算是股灾，在这么短的时间内，比如说4个交易日之内跌掉10%几20%，这种肯定算是股灾吧？我觉得，对。而且从5000点到现在破了3000点，时间非常短，我觉得应该算是一种股灾。
It signaled a withering of the China growth story. Asian stock markets, Hong Kong, Japan, India saw record falls. The gloom extended to European markets, to Germany and the UK, and even on to the Dow Jones and other US bourses. Countries with huge Chinese exports will feel it harder. The message was clear that China's transition to a slower and more sustainable rate of growth might be disruptive.
What we're really seeing, and the cause for this turbulence, I believe, is a change in economic time that we're beginning to see, which goes to say that the Americans want to create an excess demand for money by tightening, and the Chinese want to create an excess supply of money by loosening. And that's what's causing this turmoil. This always happens when there's a change in economic time. Everything gets very terribly turbulent. It's a little bit like things getting very windy before a tsunami. And then the things hit. And that's the interest rate hike in September in the States, and that's an interest rate cut in China, further interest rate cuts.
China's leaders have a few options available to them. They could cut interest rates further, something that happened on Wednesday to control the fall. They could relax rules on bank lending, or they could increase spending. Any which way, there is no escaping the fact that the country needs to switch towards a more sustainable rate of growth, a fact that the global economy that banked heavily on China has to live with.
This is a very, very difficult phase for the Chinese economy, not because of what's going on elsewhere in the world, but the rebalancing of the economy that they're trying to make away from a industrial manufacturing economy to one which is more consumer driven. They're doing exactly what every Western economy has done, but at a much faster pace.
Experts say the stock market crisis in China may not be as serious as the global economic meltdowns of 1997 or 2008, but it does mark a disturbing road ahead. Bureau Report for Rajya Sabha Television.
Well, let's take a look now at some other events that made headlines around the globe this past week in our Globe Wrap.
North and South Korea pulled back from the brink of military conflict after more than 40 hours of talks, signing an agreement to avert the bloodshed they've been threatening each other with for weeks. Pyongyang expressed regret that 2 South Korean soldiers were maimed in a recent landmine blast that Seoul had blamed on the North. South Korea, for its part, agreed to halt anti-Pyongyang propaganda broadcasts on the border. The agreement marks a step in easing animosity that had built up to breaking levels. The Koreas also struck an important humanitarian agreement by promising to resume in September the emotional reunions of families separated by the Korean War. Tens of thousands of demonstrators protested in Baghdad and southern provinces of Iraq on Friday, calling for real reforms and an end to political corruption. Rallies were also staged in Najaf, Basra and other cities across the Shiite southern heartland, following a call from powerful Shiite cleric Muqtada al-Sadr. A senior security official described the protests as the biggest of the summer. The capital and many southern cities have witnessed demonstrations in recent weeks calling for provision of basic services, trial of corrupt politicians, and shake-up of a system riddled with graft and incompetence. A reporter and camera person of WDBJ-TV in Virginia in the United States were fatally shot during a live interview on Wednesday. Police identified the killer as a fellow journalist. The attack spurred a manhunt that ended hours later when the killer turned the gun on himself as troopers closed in. Reports say he'd been fired from the same TV station a year back. The motive for the killing is still not clear. The killer reportedly sent a fax to ABC News on this. Authorities are analyzing the fax as well as his past employment record, social media posts and other evidence.
Moving on now, Islamic State militants destroyed among the most precious archaeological treasures of Syria last week, the 1st century temple of Baal Shamin in Palmyra. Like the brutal slaughter of human beings, the ravaging of irreplaceable antiquities in Syria and Iraq by the IS has become something of a grim wartime routine, bringing scholars and lovers of his priceless heritage to a new level of despair. Here's a report.
It used to be among the best preserved treasures of Palmyra till just a few days back. These are pictures released by the self-styled Islamic State, destroying the Baal Shamin temple and exercise they termed a guarding of their religion. It was among the last relics of the pre-Christianity, pre-Islam days. The ruins of a shrine that dated back to 17 AD have been run to ground. This latest Islamic State brutality casts a darker shadow on the future of other priceless treasures in Palmyra.
طالما بقت مدينة تحت سيطرة هؤلاء سنشهد مناظر مؤلمة في الأيام والأسابيع القادمة. أنا واثق من ذلك خلال الفترات القادمة. من المهم جدا أن يتم تحرير المدينة بأي شكل من الأشكال، بأي خطة وطنية دولية، بأي تعاون. كل السوريين طالما بقيت المدينة تحت سيطرة هؤلاء يعني سنخسر مدينة.
They had marched into this pearl of the desert, Palmyra, in central Syria on the 21st of May, sparking international concern about the fate of the heritage site that UNESCO called of outstanding universal value. And down the 3 months, they lived up to misgivings. There are records saying the militants destroyed 2 ancient Muslim shrines, one in Palmyra and another a few kilometers away. Other monuments, temples and historic buildings have been mined, and a statue of a lion at the entrance of Palmyra's museum has also been destroyed. This phase of the Islamic State has gone beyond Palmyra to other heritage sites in Syria and Iraq. They've pounced on treasured artifacts in Nimrud and Mosul, calling them un-Islamic. The global community has been united in condemnation. UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon said in a statement, "These barbaric acts of terror join a long list of crimes committed over the past 4 years in Syria against its civilian population and heritage." UNESCO Director General Irina Bokova said, "Such acts are war crimes and their perpetrators must be accountable for their actions." Talk of even greater tragedy facing Palmyra had taken off with the brutal hanging of 82-year-old archaeologist Khalid Al-Assad earlier in August, a man who had looked after Palmyra's ruins for 4 decades.
اغتيال الأستاذ الشهيد خالد الأسعد بهذه الطريقة الوحشية كانت بمثابة صدمة لنا كآثاريين وكسوريين وكمجتمع الدولي المعني بحضارة تدمر وتاريخ مدينة تدمر.
Cumulative destruction of antiquities represents an irreversible loss to world heritage and future scholarship. Many of these treasures have now been moved to museums in Syrian capital Damascus. This is a phase of destruction that projects itself into all time. The madness of violence takes its real toll. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Well, let's shift focus now and bring you up to speed with some big events from sporting arenas around the world this week in our sports section. Title holders Barcelona were handed a favourable draw with Bayern Leverkusen, Roma and Bate Borisov in the Champions League. Real Madrid was placed in the tougher group with Shakhtar Donetsk, Paris Saint-Germain and Malmo. Juventus, Manchester City, Sevilla and Borussia Gladbach made up Group D. Manchester United are drawn against PSV Eindhoven, CSKA Moscow and Wolfsburg. Chelsea was grouped with coach Jose Mourinho's former club Porto, Dynamo Kiev and Maccabi Tel Aviv. Bayern Munich will face Arsenal, Olympiacos and Dinamo Zagreb. Barcelona star Lionel Messi won the 2014-15 UEFA Best Player in Europe award, the first time a player has won it twice. The Argentinian beat Real Madrid's Cristiano Ronaldo and teammate Luis Suarez to the award, which was announced following the Champions League group stage draw on Thursday. The four-time FIFA World Player of the Year led Barcelona to the treble of La Liga, Champions League and Copa del Rey last season, scoring a total of 58 goals in all competitions. Spanish international Fernando Llorente has joined Sevilla from Italian champions Juventus after 2 years at the Turin club. The striker has signed a 3-year contract with the Europa League winners. Llorente scored 11 goals in 30 league starts for Juventus last season, but the arrivals of Mario Mandzukic, Paulo Dybala and Simone Zaza put him further down the pecking order. Reigning world champion Usain Bolt easily outstripped American rival Justin Gatlin to claim his 4th consecutive World 200-meter title. Bolt clocked a world-leading 9.55 seconds to beat Gatlin by nearly 0.2 of a second to add the 200 meters titles to his 100-meter title that he won earlier in the week at the World Championships in Beijing. The victory meant Bolt has now remarkably won 11 of the last 12 individual Olympic and World Sprint titles dating back to the Beijing Olympics in 2008. World number 1 Novak Djokovic could meet 8th-seeded Rafael Nadal in the US Open quarterfinals, while Andy Murray and Stan Wawrinka could meet in another quarterfinal under the US Open draw announced on Thursday. Djokovic's half of the draw also includes a potential semi-final against either 4th seed Kei Nishikori, last year's US Open runner-up from Japan, or defending champion Marin Cilic. The other half, paced by 2nd seed Roger Federer, includes the Wawrinka-Murray possible last 8 meeting. And finally, the annual Tomatina festival in Spain that's turned into one of the world's most eagerly watched events, probably because it's all so simple. Tens of thousands of revelers throwing tomatoes at each other for 1 hour and having a whale of a time. I'll leave you with these visuals. See you again next time.